And progressive Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib defending the anti-Semitic chant "From the river to the sea." She calls it an aspirational call for freedom. But some of her fellow Democrats are pushing back against that message. And I also want to bring in Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. The New York Post headline had this, that free Palestine really means eliminate Israel, and Democrats can no longer ignore it. But Bernie Sanders, he was trying to defend. Watch here.
This is an enormously complex issue. And slogans like the river to the sea, if that means the destruction of Israel, that's not going to work. People who are saying Israel, right or wrong, we're for you all the way, that's not going to work. This is a horrendously complex issue. You got a right-wing government in Israel, which is racist. I hope they get rid of them. I hope they put in a government which understands the severity of the crisis.
Is it really, that complicated, Congressman?
It's very simple. With Hamas, you have a terrorist group, a death cult that is seeking to kill as many Jews as possible and eliminate Israel. And in Israel, you have a beacon of freedom in the Middle East. It's actually the best place to be. For example, Arab Israelis have more rights in Israel than in any other government around the region. So for Tlaib and Sanders to argue that from the river to the sea is an aspirational call for human rights and not a vile eliminationist call to wipe the Jewish state off the map is absurd. It's sort of like saying that Mein Kampf was just the utopian thoughts and memoir of a failed artist. It's absurd. But the thing is, it's not just a backbencher congresswoman like Tlaib. It's some of the most powerful and important figures in the Democratic Party, like Barack Obama, who didn't go that far, but just lectured us about how we have to admit that all of us are complicit to some degree. President Obama is supposed to be an elder statesman at this point in his career, but he still sounds like a progressive community organizer. And that statement that we're all complicit, well, it's actually partly true, but not in the way he meant, because Obama is complicit because the Iran deal he struck funded Iran and thereby Hamas, and now he's going around lecturing the rest of us for it. And the Biden administration, I think, is stuck and starting to succumb to the progressive base, not only because of bad domestic poll numbers for the president, but they're just fundamentally unwilling to give up the Obama nuclear deal that they've been trying to revive since day one. It's really creating chaos for our policy in the region.
How have you been able to observe, and could you describe for us what it's like to watch the internal fighting amongst the Democrats on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, and I should admit, I guess, as a Republican member of Congress, I can't lecture on internal fighting, given the last couple of months. But this is something totally different. And really, we're seeing anti-Semitism on the left. And I do think there are members of the Democratic caucus who've been very strong and outspoken on this issue and politically assuming some risk in that regard. Richie Torres, who I work very closely with on the Select Committee on China, has been very clear and brave in his rhetoric. And others, I think, in the Michigan delegation have condemned Tlaib's remarks and asked her to recant. So there's certainly tension on the other side of the aisle. There is a growing, the squad has a lot of influence. The progressive left is clearly upset with the initial support that Biden has voiced for Israel. And it's why you're starting to see the shift, I think, in the Biden administration's rhetoric. And I'm really concerned about that, because that could result in Israel support for Israel here domestically waning, but also Israel being increasingly isolated in various international organizations and institutions which have an anti-Israel bias. And we really need the president of the United States, the commander in chief, to defend Israel in those settings.
Congressman, my last question for you is, you wrote a piece last week, Call for 5, which said, "Why do young Americans support Hamas? Look at TikTok." The app is digital fentanyl made by China, and it is brainwashing our youth against the country and our allies. It's been a few days since you wrote that. It got a lot of attention. Do you get a sense that anybody is paying attention to the warnings that you're making?
I actually think for a while there, people tried to ignore the TikTok issue, in part because TikTok had a very sophisticated lobbying campaign, and in part because there were a lot of prominent Democratic politicians who didn't want to alienate younger voters. They were more concerned about the next election than the effect this was having on the mental health of our youth. But so many people are seeing just the poison that's on TikTok right now And so we now have renewed interest in taking action in Congress, and we must act. We must either ban it or force a sale to an American company that can control the algorithm, because without control of that algorithm, we don't know whether or not or how TikTok and by extension ByteDance and the CCP could continue to push this dangerous anti-American propaganda designed to pit Americans against Americans and weaken us internally.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, thank you for joining us today. Pay attention to all you do this week. Thanks.
Okay, so we have